Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to kind of cover a little bit of the new capabilities that were introduced at the most recent OpenAI Developer Days conference back in November of 2023. Specifically, they introduced they introduced a lot, but two main things that they talked about were something called custom GPTs, as well as something called they have new models, and they have something called assistants. So again, GPTs are their solution for no coding. Definitely, I plan on having a video talking specifically about GPTs, but that's kind of their no coding option where you can create custom chatbots with no code. So that's for a separate video I plan on covering for that one. In this one, this is actually the first part of a series talking about something else, which was their Assistants API. So essentially, think of this as the kind of the coding equivalent of the GPTs. So it allows you to take advantage of the OpenAI models and be able to leverage your own data. And this was something, again, a lot of new models, but again, this is this Assistants API that we'll be talking about. And just to set the stage for this is actually a kind of a similar capability to some of the stuff that's already been worked on and out there in the field. You've already probably heard of things like LangChain, vector stores, things like Pinecone, and being able to use those tools to create something called Retrieval Augmented Generation, RAG. And essentially with these new assistants, you can do the same thing, similar. Now, I don't think that this replaces that at all. I think you're still going to have a need for it. I think there are some pretty significant limitations in terms of files and such. And I'll talk a little about that when we get through there. There's some limitations, so I think there's still a need for a lot of that work, right? This doesn't replace it. It does make it a little easier if you don't necessarily need it. And that's kind of the point of this, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first thing is we're going to be talking about the Assistants API, all right, which means you will need to have signed up for their platform. Okay, so this is not the same thing as the GPT, ChatGPT, so that's a separate offering. So for OpenAI, they have a platform, and you need to have access to that and log in and create API keys and such. So the good news is that it's generally not very expensive. So generally speaking, on average, when I've been doing my testing here, I've only spent a few dollars here and there. It's really fairly inexpensive to run these models, and but you definitely will need to have that in order to create an API key. This will also give you access once you log in to a dashboard here, where you can actually see your assistants, which we'll be talking about, fine tuning, which is something that's also capability you can do to kind of take their models and marry that better to your data and fine tune the models to your need. There's API keys, and this is what I'm talking about. You'll need to have an API key in order to call the API. Okay, so once you sign up, you can come to this dashboard, and it has a lot of good information here. It's actually seems to be recently updated, so it's nice now. They have it kind of under a better interface as far as I'm seeing. So I think that's good. You have your settings here, and you can actually even see your usage. Just to kind of give you a sense, this is actually my usage, and you can kind of see that over the last few months I've used it. But right now, as of November, I've spent about $3. I put a limit on there of $10. You can make that whatever limit you want. The good news of having a limit on there is that if for some reason you run something and maybe it's too expensive, or someone gets your API keys, you're going to be able to have it stop there, so it won't charge you more than what you specify here. But feel free to set that to whatever you need, okay? But these assistants is where we're going to be spending some time here creating these, and the API essentially is going to be the same thing that you could technically do through their user interface, but we're going to show you how to do that programmatically. All right, so let's go ahead and walk through that. So the way it works is you're going to have what are called assistants, and assistants are going to be using models and tools and potentially files. So all of these together will allow us to kind of combine the power of OpenAI models along with our own data, our own instructions, and even our own capabilities, our own functions, you can actually even call back to our applications. I'll have a separate video on part 2 where I'll talk about functions. Okay, tonight we're just going to be talking about retrievals. Okay, and so this is kind of the layout in terms of how it functions. What you're going to do is you are going to take all of these together: tools, assistant, the assistant yourself you're creating, the model that goes with it, any files that you want to have access, and you're going to bring those together into a single run of the assistant. All of that is kind of, think of that as the workhorse that's actually going to pull everything together and actually do the work for us. Okay. And then from a user perspective, you're going to be creating what are called threads. And think of threads are no different than if you're in ChatGPT and asking questions and you're getting a response back and you're seeing your questions and the response from the AI engine going back and forth. That's essentially a thread, that entire conversation. So threads are synonymous with a conversation. Okay. And the assistant is where we're going to pass our thread of what our question happened to be and any history. And then what's going to come back eventually is the completion of that thread with a new record that shows that whatever the answer was to our question. Okay. Optionally, you can also upload your files. So we're going to be doing that here. So any files that you want to have used by your assistant, you need to upload those into OpenAI. Okay, so that's the thing that's a little bit got some limitations, because right now you can only have I think the largest file that it supports is 512 megabytes, and your storage is limited to 100 gigabytes are the limits that I'm currently seeing. So if you have a lot of data, if you're really doing a lot more, then you're probably not going to use the files this way. You're probably going to either use a vector store, something like Pinecone, or you can use functions, and functions can do the equivalent of that. And I can show you that in a separate video how that would work. But for purposes of a really simple explanation of how this works or an example, we're going to be uploading a file here and showing how we can retrieve and ask questions against our file. All right, so I have my Colab notebook here that I'm going to use to demonstrate the API and how it works. So what you're first going to do is you need to install the libraries or dependencies for OpenAI. So you need to have the OpenAI library along with TickToken and Cohere are dependencies of the OpenAI package. So you're going to install that. And then once you do that, we're going to import a few files. So we're going to import, essentially the biggest one is this OpenAI import statement here. So that's actually going to be what we're going to call our client from and create our client from this. And then obviously we're going to be using JSON potentially and some other utilities. So here you're going to also need to have your API key. So you're going to then take this, so you're going to get this from your environment. So you'll get that from over here under OpenAI. You'll come down here, grab a key, create one, and then you're going to paste that along with your organizational ID and again, these are just local variables that I'm going to be using when I create the client. So you need to have those. All right. And once you have that, then you can go ahead and create an OpenAI client. So here it's pretty simple. You're just going to call the OpenAI function. You're going to pass in your organization and your API key and create that. Once it's created, then you're able to then start the process. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first update and upload a file that we're going to use for our testing purposes. All right, and I mentioned earlier the limitations. So file size, the largest file size is 512 megabytes, and the largest the max storage you can have up there is 100 gigabytes. So if you're doing more than that, then you're going to have to take a different approach right now. All right. So I'm just going to, now for the purposes of demonstrating this, I essentially just copied down a specification PDF from the web. So here is the document that we're going to be using. So this is just a user's manual for Vizio TV series, and it's got a bunch of different models that it supports. And so this has a lot of data in here. You can kind of see it's quite large. So it's got about 49 pages or so of information inside this document. So one of the things we'll try to do is ask us some questions that we're going to be able to see, maybe perhaps ask you questions about the specifications or whatever else you want to. This will be our test document. All right, so that's what we're going to upload. The way we're going to upload that document is we're first going to copy it down. So I already have it here in my environment. So here's my TV manual PDF. What you're going to do is you have to create the file. So you're going to use our OpenAI client that we created above here. And we're going to use the files resources. We're going to go ahead and hit create. And we're going to first off give it a path to the file. So this has to be a fully qualified path to your local file. And we also need to give it a purpose. So there's a number of different purposes that you can use for files. You can use it for fine tuning and you can use it for assistance. So you have to specify both when you create the files. So the way the files work is you can have as many files up until that those max limits that we talked about. And within your assistant, you can decide which of these files are going to be part of that assistant. Which files can the assistant actually utilize, okay? So once you upload that, if you go back over into the environment, and I'll just jump over here and show you, I already have it uploaded. You'll see there is my TV manual PDF. I click on it, I got some details here, the file ID, and what its purpose is, again, and when it was created, and obviously file size. So this is a fairly small, it's 7 megabytes roughly in size, but it sits up here. And you can have as many files as you want, just make sure you adhere to those limits that we talked about earlier. Once you have the file created, you're going to get back a file ID, okay? So once it's been uploaded, if you call the client files list function, and you can get a list of all of your files. So here is my collection or list of files, and I only have one file right now, that's the file ID. Okay, so you can run a print statement on that one and print out that file ID. So you'll need that because when you create your assistant, you're going to provide the access or provide the list of files that the assistant's able to use. You're going to grant access to those files. So you may have 50 files in your account, but the assistant, you only want them to use 3 of those files, right? So you specify exactly what files that you want. All right, so the second step is to go ahead and create your assistant and provide that information. So when we create the assistant, we're going to be using the assistant's resource and the create method on there. We're going to give it a name. All right, so I'm going to call mine Visio TV Chatbot. And here's where you're going to give your instructions on how, what this particular chatbot or what this assistant is actually supposed to do. So you provide your instructions here. So I'm just saying that this is a chatbot designed to respond to inquiries about the Visio V series televisions, models, all these models. So those happen to correspond to the models in my document here. Same list of models here, right? So I'm just using this list of models and just doing it that way. You also provide the model that you're going to use. So there are a handful of models that you can use for this. There's GPT-4 1106 Preview and 3.5 Turbo 1106 as well. So those are the newest models, and there's some other ones out there, but those are the 2 that are primarily being demonstrated at this time. So you're going to create, once you create the assistant, you also are going to provide it with which tools that it can use. So in our case, the only tool we wanted to do is a retrieval tool, meaning we wanted to talk to our documents. Okay, so that's it. So there's no other tools. You can add additional tools. And again, as I mentioned, I'll have another video to go over that. And then also you provide the list of file IDs. Okay, so this is the list of 1 or more files that you want to have the assistant use to answer the question. All right, so I'm going to take my file ID for the file that I uploaded, and I'm just going to provide that in here, the assistant. Go ahead and create that. All right, hit OK there and create that assistant. So there it is. So there's the assistant. You have the ID for it. All right, and again, if I wanted to, I can go back into the list of assistants, and there is my Visio TV chatbot with all the details. And again, if I wanted to, I could even choose different models here if I wanted to. So anything we're doing through the API, you can do straight from the UI as well. So again, the only one I have turned on is Retrieval. I could use Code Interpreter if I wanted to, or I can add my own functions. And I only have one file specified here. All right, so all of that corresponds to exactly what I had put in my calls. All right, so now that I have that, I can go back over here, and if I wanted to, I can retrieve the list of assistants. So I can use that assistants resource again, get the list out of there, and get back that collection of different assistants. I only have that one assistant that we just created. All right, next thing is let's talk about how we utilize this assistant. We have it created, it knows about our files, it knows how to use them, and it knows what model it's supposed to use. How do we leverage and how do we ask questions to it? All right, let's talk about that a little bit and show you how that works. All right, so all of this up here has already been created. We established the files, we gave it the model and the assistant, we told it which tools we want to use. In this case, we're just using the retrieval tool. And the last but not least is we need to give it our questions. And the way it works is we are going to create something called a thread, and then we're going to put messages inside of the thread. Okay, so these are going to be individual messages. Messages could be user messages or AI messages, and that again is our conversation. All right, so when we want to ask questions, the user is going to ask a question by putting it in there, and we'll create a message for it inside of the thread, and then we're going to then send that to the run, and the run is going to pull in the assistant and everything else and execute the call, and then eventually once it's done, it's going to give us a completed message within our thread that we can then retrieve back to the user. All right, so that's kind of the process that we follow. Everything we've done so far is we do that one time. Okay, so everything up to this point is done once. Once we have the assistant created and the files uploaded and we've set all that up, then now it's just asking questions through these threads. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create an empty thread. All right, so we're going to use our client. And again, all of this right now, just should also mention, is under the beta resource. So again, this is all still beta at this point, but eventually it will probably be moved to a different location. So if you're writing assistants, be aware that at some point your code's probably going to have to change once this has been fully approved for use. All right, so let's go ahead and create our thread. So there's our thread. We can go ahead and print it out, and here's our thread ID. Okay, so we see when it was created. And we have, the most important thing with all of these is the ID that you get for either the thread or the assistant or the file, because that's essentially what we're going to be using to talk to those resources. Everything we're doing is actually being created out on the OpenAI environment, right? So essentially, if we want to go back and access it, we need to give it the threads or the IDs of whatever resource we're using. All right, so here's our thread ID. And we're going to go ahead and add a user message to the thread. So we have to take our thread ID that we just created. We need to tell it what type of message we're going to create. It's going to be a user message. And then what is the message? So in our case, I'm going to ask a question. What is the viewable area of the V58 V585M K01 model Vizio TV? Okay, which we should be able to get from our document. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that in. That'll create the message and put it in the thread. Now our thread now has that message. So at this point, we have the thread ready to go, and we have all of the assistant set up to run. We have the files ready to be pulled and retrieved. And the last piece is to go ahead and put it all together into a run. Okay, and the run is actually going to be where we take the thread, our thread, with all of our data, we take the assistant, and any other instructions that we want to have it do. And in this case, we're just giving instructions to tell it to, please address the answer as Bob, user as Bob, whatever instructions you want. And then I also just put this in here just to tell it, look, if it doesn't know the answer, just don't return anything, right? So we really wanted to just be retrieving from our document. Once we hit run, we're going to get back an ID for the run. So now the runs happen asynchronously. So they're happening right now. And eventually we're going to get back the result of that. So once you have kicked off a run, you need to kind of check it to see what its status is. So if I hit run, retrieve, and I can get the status of it by retrieving that run back out, I can retrieve the status. You can kind of see it says completed. When you see a status of completed, that simply means that it's done, that the AI has completely completed whatever you asked it to do. In our case, it retrieved the data and it didn't need to do anything further, and it was fairly fast because it didn't take more than a couple of seconds. Depending on what's going on, you may need to wait a while. I've seen this where it'll stay in progress for some amount of time because it's queued up, because there's a lot of other folks who are also testing out these assistants. So you'll need to just kind of wait for that to be completed. We'll talk about some other statuses in the future, but what you can do to kind of streamline this is put a while loop together and just check to see. You keep waiting, keep checking and retrieving the status every so often until eventually you get either it completed or it failed. Okay, if it fails for some reason, which is not uncommon, then you at least know to stop the thread. So here is our message. So we're running it. Okay, so here is our status here. And oh, by the way, so that said completed, so that's why this loop didn't run. All right, so now once it's completed, now essentially our threads now have the new AI message in there. So all we have to do is just pull out that thread object back down and reach in there and get the AI message back. All right, so if you run the threads message list, that gives you all of the messages within a specific thread given a specific thread ID. So we're saying go get the thread, go and retrieve all of the data about it. And I'm just going to iterate over the messages and see here if I run this, that the message came back with here was my original question. And then here is the answer. The reviewable area of the Vizio TV model V585M K01 is 57.5 inches. So that was a good answer. So let's actually go back and look. So back in my document here, I'm on the specifications page, and this is the specifications for that particular TV. And sure enough, the viewable area is 57.5. Let's ask it one other question. Let's ask for the power consumption. Let's take a look and see what the power consumption is. So 54, so we should get back 94.14 watts for power consumption if we're doing this correctly. So let's go back over. And let's ask it another question. We'll come back up here. And I'll say, what is the power consumption? All right, let's go ahead and add that in to our thread. All right, let's go ahead and run it. There's our run. We'll come back here and click on our loop, wait for it to, and you can kind of see it says in progress right now. So it's waiting, it's actually processing it. So this is going to keep looping until eventually we get back that it's completed. All right, there it is. Now it's completed. I can now go and retrieve the messages from our thread. And sure enough, there is our message. There's our original question. Here is the answer for the original question. Here is our second question. And it says that the power consumption of the Vizio TV model we asked for is sure enough, there is correct. So there you go. So this essentially is how you can use the assistants to do retrieval on documents, and not very hard to do. There's not much code to do this. So again, what I'm going to do next is create another video that talks about how we can take this a step further and call our own code to do additional work. For example, let's say that we wanted to send an email to a user based on the response, right? Maybe this is a chatbot that's helping with a support technician or what have you. So you want to be able to send an email. So that's the purpose of the next part 2. We'll talk about how to leverage functions. Also point out real quick, it's always a good idea to go ahead and delete anything you're not going to use. So you can delete your assistant out just by calling the assistants resource and the delete function on there and passing in your ID. And then I would do the same thing with files just to get rid of any of that. So the same thing, go into the files resource of the client and call the delete function. And then both of those are cleaned up. So that gives you back to a a good state so you're not using more than you need to resource-wise. All right, I hope you found this useful. And if you like this, please like and subscribe. Also, if you have additional suggestions and other videos that you'd want to see, please put those in the comments, and I'd be happy to entertain other types of videos. Thank you for listening.